There we are. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, what I plan on talking about tonight is, first of all, just have a general review of where we are now, looking at COVID last year and this year, a review of business models and some options maybe for reducing costs, maximising revenue, some of the challenges for the future, what we can look forward to in 2021, and then next steps we'll hand over to Hannah and Graham. So next, please. Well, it's an understatement to say it's been a difficult year. Many vessels have had no income or a reduced income. Many vessels are strapped for cash. The Llangollen Railway, I just noticed, called in the receiver last week, and we may see more of that, unfortunately. And many historic ships, as well as other businesses, are on the edge, and I think it's a real cause for concern. Next. However, let's show in a bit of optimism, and we're not alone. There's 50 paddle steamers in Europe, all operating or capable of operating, and there's plenty of different ways of skinning cats, so we're not alone. 17 in Switzerland, 15 in Germany, and so on and so forth. And the next. And another little bout of optimism. There's 1,000 domestic passenger vessels in the UK. You know, we're not alone. There's a lot of vessels around, and the overwhelming majority of them run with MCA class 4, 5 and 6 passenger certificates. And the next. Last year, there were lots of boats not running. The Daniel Adamson was caught in dry dock and had to get out before the end of her survey and refit to make way for essential work. The Shield Hall didn't run. And the next. In Switzerland, most of the paddle steamers ran, not all of them, but it wasn't a good summer really, because people were not there, people stayed away, people couldn't travel. KC did run and was fairly successful, running with reduced capacity, running 3 trips, 3-hour trips a day, about 6 days a week. So actually she did relatively well. And the next. Some vessels have an uncertain future. Looking around in Europe, the tug Elbe, the ice-breaking tug at Hamburg, she's up for sale, and the Estrella Scheveningen, she's also up for sale. And the next. Last summer, there were no international tourists at Dresden. I mean, it was almost a ghost city, and the company running the 8 paddle steamers there went into administration, but I'm pleased to say they've been bought by Swiss interests, which also own vessels on the Rhine. And the next. Location mattered an awful a great deal last year. London, hardly any international tourists, etc. And City Cruises running in London had a very, very weak season. But City Cruises at Poole, on the other hand, had a not bad season, and running with reduced numbers. They actually had to charter in an extra boat to help with the capacity. And the next. There have been some grants around. The National Lottery Heritage Emergency Fund has shelled out 126k towards helping ships. The Pilgrim Heritage Sailing Foundation, the Thames Sailing Barge Trust, the Hovercraft Museum, the Pioneer Sailing Trust and the Mary Rose Trust all benefited. And the next. The Cultural Recovery Fund, round 1, that forked out about 5 million to the National Maritime Museum in Cornwall. The Great Britain, the Mary Rose, the Blythe Tall Ship, the Daniel Adamson, the Dudley Canal and Tunnel Trust, the Golden Hind Trust, the Liner River Barge, the Morwell Quay, the Balmoral and the Pilgrim Heritage Sailing Foundation. And the next. The Cultural Recovery Fund, round 1, they stumped up within that 5 million. I just said the Pioneer Sailing Trust, the Portsmouth Naval Base Property Trust, the Rickmansworth Waterways Trust, the Tall Ship Zebu, Thames Steamers, Island Trust, the Wellington Trust, and the Underfall Yard at Bristol. The next. Okay, so where are we now? By no means all vessels applied for grants, and of course the grants that were available were very helpful, but they're small in relation to the usual turnover of the vessels. Some benefited from furlough, some benefited from rate relief, but rate relief I think was variable, with some local authorities saying that they wouldn't give rate relief to properties.
Sorry, John. I've had to mute one or two people. Apologies for that. Right. John, you're free to go now, I think.
Thank you. Okay, so where are we now? Some benefited from furlough. As I said, rate rebates were variable, but most vessels have had a reduced or no income the last year. And I think it's also doubtful that those who have had grants in the last year will get them again. And unfortunately, I think our sector is not a top priority for the government. And the next. Well, as I said,
one, John?
That's fine.
Yep.
Kingsway Castle sailed last year with COVID restrictions. And the next. For that, we had to do a risk assessment to decide the number to carry, and we carried about 125, which is roughly speaking half a normal passenger capacity. Interesting to note that the MCA wasn't interested in the detail in this, so long as you were complying with the government's requirements on COVID. We had to manage social distancing in queuing and aboard, and have hand sanitizer at the gangway and around the ship, and the passengers wearing face masks. And the dark business in general put up plastic screens in various places on some of the other boats, not on Kingsway Castle. And the next. Okay, now if we just look at the COVID timetable coming down the line now, all these dates are the earliest, and they may be pushed back. At present, I don't see there's any reason why people can't go to work if you can't work from home. So long as the workplace is COVID safe, your staff can get on with the refitting of ships and get them ready for the season. And the next. As of today, passenger boats are not permitted to run, or hotel boats. Self-drive boats can go with the same household as long as people stay local. Holiday hire is not permitted. Static trading boats can do takeaways, and skip at hire boats are not permitted to go. Private boats from the same household, as long as you stay local, you can go. And the next. Boom. We've jumped to the final one of the. Go back one more. As of the 12th of April, passenger boats, outdoor attractions can open. So if your boat is entirely outdoors in the open, then I don't see why that shouldn't open then. Hotel boats can start to open. Self-drive boats can go up to 6 people and 2 households. Static trading boats can now do outdoor table service, and skippered hired boats at discretion. And the next.
Seems to have got a bit sticky.
Oh dear. From the 17th of May, indoor attractions can open. So I take it from that passenger boats can operate, although they'll have to do it in a COVID safe way. Again, hotel boats can now have 6 people, 2 households. Self-drive boats, there are now no restrictions. Holiday hire, 6 people, 2 households. Static trading boats, now you can serve people indoors, but only 6 people or 2 households per group. And skippered hire boats at the discretion of the skipper. And the next. And then the 21st of June, and no earlier, all restrictions are lifted. So from then on, we're in theory out of the woods, although of course all of these dates are not set in stone and they might be pushed back. And I think whatever happens after that, there will still be a requirement for social distancing, hand sanitizers, face masks, maybe plastic screens, and indeed vaccine passports might be a thing, although that's nothing definitive on that at the moment. So 2021, what should we do now? Well, looking at it from a positive point of view, the virus is on the way out, deaths are decreasing, hospitalizations decreasing, vaccinations are proceeding well, the roadmap for release from lockdown is there. Maybe many people this year will holiday in the UK, and we can capitalize on that for a boom summer. And maybe this will be the best business we've had for decades. Next. However, you could look at it from a less positive point of view. All the roadmap dates are the earliest, so they might be pushed back. Ooh. We need to go on one from that, Henry. That's it. The new strains of virus might come along to produce new problems. And even if we are okay, the rest of the world may not be. Will international tourists come back in 2021? And if so, in what volume? And will people still have concerns and not travel or associate in big groups, for example, on boats? So the positive way of looking at the summer and a less positive way. And the next. I think for all of us at the moment, the most important thing above all else is safeguarding the asset. That must be our #1 priority, because we want to see all the boats, ships, vessels, etc. still here in 2 years' time and not in the hands of the receiver. So we have choices to make. Is it better to run and maybe have a brilliant season, or maybe we might run and go bust in the doing of it, which is not desirable, or should we hunker down and not run? And I think success and what is chosen really depends upon circumstances and depends very much on your business model, and whether your business model is right for the current circumstances for 2021. Next. Well, just before we go on and looking at costs, etc., just chunter through the MCA. Many people view the MCA in different ways. People have different views about them. I think the most important thing for all of us, as I'm sure you're all well aware, is establish a good working relationship with the MCA and field someone who talks the same language. This also is not really the time to do or be forced to do difficult and expensive stuff. So if you feel that the MCA suggest that you ought to be doing this, that, or the other this year, then I think one wants to discuss it with them and say, well, yes, maybe that does need doing, but perhaps, you know, we don't need doing it now. And if we do it now, we might go bust. I think one has to remember that, as we know, the MCA are all professional mariners, people with masters tickets, chief engineers tickets, and everybody coming down on your ship, even with coal-fired boilers, will know about and have learnt about the principle of that. But it may well be that you know more about coal-fired boilers than an MCA surveyor, and that's not a criticism of the MCA, just the fact that they're not seeing them every day. And the next. And I think this is a golden point that is sometimes overlooked, that you've got to remember when dealing with the MCA that it is your ship you're dealing with, it's not the MCA's. And what happens to your ship must be with your consent, because it's your asset, you own it. And what you don't want is them saying, well, I want you to cut a hole in the bottom here, or cut a hole in the boiler, or whatever, and then they walk away and you're left with a hole. Of course, you have to come to a landing, and of course, you've got to come to an agreement with them. But there are cases where not everybody agrees on things, and you are quite entitled, if you think that the surveyor is not right, to get expert opinion to counter that. And I think, in my experience, a well-argued case, you know, works. A poorly argued case doesn't work. I mean, if you say, no, we're not doing this, well, they'll just walk away. But I think if you make a well-argued case, in my experience, the MCA have ears. And the next. I think also a real issue for passenger vessels is that where the railways have a commonality in what they do. I mean, every steam railway running up and down the country is doing largely the same thing to largely the same regulations. That is not the case for ships and vessels. And the variations in requirements are sizably different between a Class 3 seagoing vessel running with STCW and all that sort of stuff and a Class 6 vessel. And therefore, you want to make sure that the regulations that people are trying to get you to do are applicable to you. And one doesn't have the nightmare scenario of a surveyor coming down and just done a survey on the QE2 and is thinking QE2 when he's looking at your 50-seater passenger launch. There used to be 2 books, Instructions for the Guidance of Surveyors, which were the handiest books I've ever seen for this arena. Which set out all the details, etc. Now in this digital world, they have gone. So I think it's often harder to find regulations which are often buried in end notices, etc. But for vessels on categorized waters, MSN 1823, the safety code for categorized waters, is a very useful thing to have at your fingertips. And above all, always work in harmony with the MCA and in the spirit of mutual respect. Next. Okay, a number of the things I'm going to say now in terms of reducing costs and maybe deriving revenue are really from the school of the blindingly obvious. And I think there's nothing wrong with stating the blindingly obvious, because whilst we're busy screwing screws in or deciding whether you want 2 handrails here or 1, one can often miss really basic stuff. I mean, in these circumstances at the moment, we all have to look at reducing costs any which way we can. You know, talk to suppliers, service providers, take advantage of free money if available, postpone all but essential work. You know, does the job really need doing now? Of course, some things you have to do. I mean, some things for safety you must do, but some things might wait. And don't get bounced into spending what you can't afford. We're in survival mode now, and all of us must make ourselves lean to survive. And the next. Well, can we reduce costs? I'm very fond of this coffee cup, which will appear more than once in this short talk. I quite like a cup of coffee, and a cup of coffee in the Costa Coffee or Cafe Nero, whatever, is £2.50. If I have a cup of coffee every day in the course of a year, I will have spent £912. That's enough for 2 weekend breaks in Lausanne to have a trip around Lake Geneva. And what I'm really just reminding us all here is that little bitty things add up. Every penny counts. You know, don't say you can't make savings. You'll find some savings somewhere. Next. In practical ways, again, this is all the school of the blindingly obvious, and you'll probably think me daft for saying all this, but obviously you can make greater use of trained volunteers who are free. You can shorten your cruises in these troubled times. I mean, if you lop 1 hour off a trip, you're saving 1 hour's fuel and wages. If you lop 2 hours off a trip, you're saving 2 hours fuel and wages every day. So if you were running, let's say, a 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. cruise, and you made it an 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. cruise, that's 2 hours of fuel and wages banked. Every hour saved is an hour banked. And if you're saving £500 a day, over 100 days, that's £50,000. If you manage to save £1,000 a day, over 100 days, that's £100,000. And the next. Run at a slower speed and don't go so far. Expand the timetable. Running flat out is disproportionately and seriously expensive. Ferry companies know that. I mean, when I was a child going from Southampton to Cowes on the Carisbrooke Castle, the Osborne Castle, those lovely old early versions of car ferries, the journey time was 50 minutes. Today on Red Funnel, it's an hour. It's expanded. You know, you're not going so fast. Kingsway Castle, you may know, has 4 fuller heads, 4 valve setting for fuller head, which we cunningly call 1, 2, 3, and 4. On number 1, the engineer stoker pops in a bit of coal every now and again. On number 2, a little bit more. Captains are often a bit nervous of asking for number 4 because the engineer has to bung the coal in so fast that it becomes a real issue. Remember that the last knot has a disproportionate effect on fuel consumption, and every little helps. And the next. And can you reduce your harbour dues, pilotage, rope handlers? Maybe reduce the number of calling points. I mean, why call it 3 pickup points if you can do it from 1? And there's a thing I never tire of saying. We in boats think we have to go around and pick up passengers, but other tourist attractions don't do that. I mean, Alton Towers doesn't move around the country collecting visitors. People go to the V&A. The V&A doesn't come to you. And the next. Well, because I go to Switzerland quite a lot, I'm a great admirer of EasyJet, and I like the EasyJet mindset. Before they came along, traveling by air was much more expensive. EasyJet and Ryanair looked at everything with fresh eyes, and they remodeled the costs and fares. And that which other operators said could not be done was done. Can you do the same with your business to lower costs and increase the revenue? Think outside the box. And on that example, let's just remind ourselves of the car ferry Lymington. And the next. I'm sure you all know that in terms of the manning on a ship, it is you as the owners who decide how it should be done. Yes, the MCA tell you what certificates you need, and they may have a scale for a vessel in terms of the number of passengers carried as to how many crew you need, but essentially it's up to you to decide how you want to run your boat. And the EasyJet mentality is here on this boat here. And when I say this to people, people often just don't believe me and say, well, this is not possible. But the Lymington, built for the Southern Railway to run between Lymington and Yarmouth, when she was running for the railway, had a crew of 15. When she went to Western Ferries as a Sandwich schooner, she had a crew of 4. That's a saving of all those crew members. And the next. Reduce manning if you're paying out wages, etc. In the 1980s, all the Swiss captains started to do their own steering, or rather they were forced to do their own steering. Some of the Swiss captains didn't like that. And in fact, on Lake Lucerne, some moved off the paddle steamers and were replaced by a new generation that didn't mind doing that. And now almost all the European paddle steamers have 1-man bridge watch, not a 2-man bridge watch. Here I am on the bridge ring of the Vevey, taking her away from Sanguin Gulf. And 1 man does that in moving the ship, steering the ship and handling the engines. You steer the ship on the bridge ring with the jog switch in my right hand. There is, she has a bridge control in the old telegraph there. And I mentioned the Balmoral here. I know we have some Balmoral supporters here, and I love the Balmoral. The Balmoral used to come down to Weymouth when I was a child for annual refits by cousins. But it's no more than the fact that to do that job on the Balmoral requires 4 men. There's a man on the telegraph, a man on the wheel, a man on the port engine, and a man on the starboard engine, where on an equivalent Swiss vessel, there'll be 1 person doing that. Well, you might want to keep that, and there are good reasons if historically accuracy and all that sort of stuff. But if you're strapped for cash, you know, saving 3 wages is a lot of money. And the next. And if you do use modern technology, there's no reason why that should not be in keeping or hidden away in keeping with the ambience of the ship. This is on the Holland view on the Bodensee Lake Constance. That looks like a conventional telegraph, and it is a brass telegraph, but it actually is an electric telegraph. And the electric steering and the bow thrust are all tucked away in this rather nice varnished box. And the next. Well, I'm back to the coffee cup here again. And this is in terms of price. There's coffee and there's coffee. You can buy a cup of coffee for £1 in a club somewhere. You're probably paying £2.50 on average. For a premium product, you're paying £4.95. You might pay £8 or £9 for a cup of coffee if you decided to have one in the Savoy Hotel. There are different people with different prices. And historic ships are premium products, so don't be afraid of higher prices. And commercial companies set fares to cover their costs. And if you want to buy that coffee cup, You can buy a coffee cup like that in Asda or Tesco for under £1. That's a Creuset one. If you want one of those, they're £16.50 in John Lewis. You know, so there's a huge disparity in what people will pay. Next. And just to take one example of fares, Whitelink are entirely commercial operators, as opposed to Calmac on the Clyde, which have big subsidies. Whitelink have no subsidies. The journey time from Portsmouth to Ryde or Fishbourne and Lymington to Yarmouth is about 30 minutes, a little bit shorter on the catamarans, a little bit longer on the Fishbourne route. But the single foot passenger fare is £14, so they're charging £28 per hour steamed. The day return's £18.20, so that's £18.20 per hour steamed, and the period return is £26, which is £26 per hour steamed. So these are commercial rates to cover costs. They don't have subsidy. So, you know, if you haven't got any subsidy, you need to charge fares that cover your costs. And the next. I think in the pricing policy on fares, the right fare is always the highest fare your markets will stand. The operating income must exceed the operating expenditure. And to get an idea of what your fare should be, you should divide your running costs. I mean, I know I'm telling my granny to suck eggs, but you divide the running costs for the trip by the number of passengers to find the fare, and then add on a bit. And always think of the revenue produced per hour steamed. And don't forget that Whitelink are charging £18.20. And if you scale that up for a 5-hour trip at that rate, that's £100 for a 5-hour trip for a commercial company like Whitelink. And the next. In terms of pricing, it is, when we were running Casey on the Medway, she was a bit out on a limb and not that many people in the vicinity. It wasn't a honeypot area, therefore I kept the prices higher, because if you're only going to take a smaller number of people, you may as well try and screw as much money out of them as you possibly can, because you need that money. Today, she's in a honeypot area at Dartmouth. There's masses of people there, so you can lower the prices and price for volume to attract more people on. Don't forget also, you can charge different prices on different days. And if your trips sell out, then next time put the prices up. I remember some years ago, some enthusiasts complaining about the costs of going around the Isle of Wight on a paddle steamer and saying, oh, people never pay those prices, they're so high. But that year, on the 4 or 5 occasions this vessel went around the Isle of Wight, she was always full. So I would say on that basis, the prices were too low. Now is not the time to undercharge. And if you're lucky enough to have an operating subsidy, well, don't rely on it, because it will only be there as long as the people providing it will give it to you. And the next. And just on the subject of fares, I'll just pop in children. Children you want to encourage, but it's a difficult balance, in that children sometimes get easily bored fractious and upset the other passengers. The Mersey ferries do this by encouraging the children on short trips using price and discouraging children from the longer trips using price. So the 1 hour River Explorer, that adults £11, concession £9.50, child £7.50, and the family £30. But the Manchester Ship Canal cruise, that's £46 for everyone, adults, concessions, or children. And that, you know, controls the problem. And the next. Another thing, again, this is Granny blinding the school of the blinding obvious. Don't run at an operating loss. I remember somebody saying to me, the Blue Funnel boat there in Cowes is always tied up and it's not running. Well, I'm a great admirer of Blue Funnel. I think they have a fantastic business model. And they know that they run their boats when they have business for them, and they don't run their boats when they don't have business for them. I mean, they're not running their boats around empty, wasting fuel and wages. They bring them out to demand. They're masters of utilising their resources wisely at Southampton, Portsmouth and Cowes. We all have to try to use our vessels profitably too. And the next. Are there other things that we can do? Well, you know, be imaginative. You're in a certain area, you might be restricted by that. What can you do? What can you do that's different? And on Lake Geneva, for example, where there used to be a lot of vessels going up and down the lake, now it is segmented with at the western end of the lake a circuit twice a day or 3 times sometimes from Geneva to Nyon and Ivoire. At the eastern end of the lake, a little circuit, Vevey, Montreux, Le Bouvray and Saint-Gingolf, another circuit from Lausanne around the eastern lake, and from Geneva to Lausanne. So you can get sometimes a lot of different trip options out of a relatively small geographical location. And the next. Well, I would advocate that anybody who is running a business should study marketing segmentation. I think it is crucial. The first marketing segmentation course I went to, the tutor went round the room asking everyone what we'd had for breakfast. And that was a very good way of just flagging up in everybody's mind that people are different. Someone had cornflakes, someone had toast, someone had baked beans, etc., etc. We're all different. We're not the same. There are many different markets out there. There are different markets with different pockets, and there are different markets with different desires. And the next. You need, if you're running a business, to decide what markets are fit for your ship, target the markets with the most disposable cash. It's a waste of time targeting markets that don't have lots of or enough disposable cash. Be imaginative in how you're targeting them. I mean, for example, if you wanted to attract the sort of people who might read Country Life magazine, well, that's an expensive magazine to advertise in, but the sort of people who read Country Life might also have Labradors. So if you took an advert in the Labradors Gazette, you could get through to the same people, but at a cheaper way of doing it. For all of us, the core of enthusiasts are very important, but we must not run our ships just for that one market segment. And the next. Just to quickly flash through this, in marketing segmentation, marketing people look at different market segments, and they have these acronyms for them. Single income, no kids. Well, no kids means they may have more disposable income. DINKS, double income, no kids, they've got double the income. Empty nesters, middle-aged people who have children who left home. Socio-economic classes A, B, and C. People with a passing interest. At Casey on the Medway, we also targeted people who might one weekend visit Hever Castle or the V&A or Chartwell or something. Specialist groups, retired groups, women's institutes, probus clubs. And as a final thing to say on marketing segmentation, I think a key thing of it is don't mix incompatible markets on the same trip. I mean, if, for example, you have a party of from a rugby club who want a few beers, it is advisable not to book them on the same trip as a convention of nuns. And the next. Well, this is not a marketing seminar in general, so I'm not going to go through marketing, but I do just want to flag up one thing that is crucial, I think, in this day and age, that your marketing through your website needs to have the facility to remind people and ask them why they haven't booked. I mean, if I want to book a hotel in Lausanne, let's say, and I look on booking.com and I don't book, I can be sure I'll get an email from booking.com saying, oh, look, there's a nice hotel in Lausanne for you to book. That sort of automatic reminder, I think, is it saps people's wills and encourages them to book. And the next. Just a little bit about social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They're excellent things. They are a focal point for supporters, but I think they're a double-edged sword. They make marketing easy. They make the dissemination of news easy. I mean, if, let's say, your boat's running half an hour late, you can put up on Twitter, it's running half an hour late, so everyone knows. But obviously the downside is that people say what they think. And what they say about what they think of a trip on a nice day may be quite different from what they say about having a trip when it's not nice. And in that, I think in terms of a business model, you always want to try to not set yourself up for failure, i.e. not putting on things that might go wrong. And as an example of that, at Dartmouth, for all the different trip options on the boats there used to be a trip option to go for a day trip from Dartmouth to Salcombe. That was immensely weather dependent, and about half the trips were cancelled due to the weather. That used to produce an enormous amount of flack. So in the end, they decided that they would pull them because they just weren't worth the hassle. And next. Look at how other people do it. My great role model are the Swiss. They've got a perfect business model with a surplus of income over expenditure. They rebuild their ships and paddle steamers every 25 to 30 years. And the Stadt Luzern, which was built in 1927, is just emerging from her fourth rebuild. And the next. And also, I pop this in as a note of optimism. It's so hard in this day and age with all these new regulations, etc. Remember, there's no ban on operating or building traditional-looking ships with traditional features, so long as they comply with the structural requirements. And this nice vessel, the Decent, on the Amazon, she looks traditional. She's got a straight bow, a low foredeck, a counter stern, stovepipe funnel. She looks like a traditional steamer, but actually was built in 2002 to comply with the latest regulations. And the next. Well, so now just finally looking at some challenges for the future. Regulation is a great challenge for us in the historic fleets, and operating historic ships, as we all know, gets harder all the time with constantly changing regulations. We just had the grandfather rights issue, which, so far as I'm aware, still hasn't gone through Parliament. I think it's been pushed down the agenda with the pandemic. And of course, as we all know, we have safety management systems and the paper trails, etc., which were undreamt of 25, 30 years ago. I would commend you also to read the MAIB report on the Red Funnel's Red Falcon, which you may remember got lost in Cowes Harbour in fog last year and ran down a yacht. And that is very interesting just for the recommendations, etc., and particularly in relation to the training. I mean, the idea of putting a captain on a ship now and saying, well, off you go, is just not there. Everyone has to be trained. You have to demonstrate that you train them and have refresher courses and all that sort of stuff. And the next. I think also it's important for us in this sector to remember that historic ships are not necessarily less safe. People sometimes like to portray them in that way. They are different. But they do have their pluses. I mean, one might say that safer in terms of the fact that often they have much less electricity than a modern ship, and electricity is a great fire hazard. And if you look through the historic record of excursion paddle steamers and excursion vessels in the UK sailing around our coasts from the 1880s onwards, on the whole, it's an immensely good reputation. And indeed, I would say better than the reputation of modern ro-ro ferries, if you look at the number of ro-ro ferries which have capsized and sunk with great loss of life. Of course, we need to work with the MCA to improve safety, but we need also to maybe resist some arbitrary MCA requirements. One thing that is on my agenda at the moment is this 5 years out of service and the MCA will regard you as a new ship. Well, that's purely arbitrary. KC was 20 years out of service and we renewed our PCs in 1985. And in all of that, in the background to that, one needs to remember that some operators want to go further than the MCA. I was talking to some surveyors over lunch after a meeting in Southampton a couple of years ago, and one of the MCA senior officials was sort of jokingly saying that, you know, we think we might want to impose this on the industry, but we think, well, maybe we'd be going too far and the industry would resist it. But when they put it out to the industry, they find there are people in the industry who say, oh, yes, that's a good idea, and actually want to go even further. So, you know, don't do the MCA work for them. And the next. Okay, well, coming down the track, emissions are an issue for the future. Low emission engines are all the rage. The Raven on Ullswater has had low emission engines put in this last year, which are quieter to operate, more fuel efficient, etc. And we need to remember that the government is banging on about zero carbon emissions by 2050. Well, the MCA was saying at a recent meeting that, well, given that ships are built to last 25 years, if you build a ship and you want it to still be going after 2050, you're going to have to start thinking about having zero carbon emissions on ships built from 2025, which is only the day after tomorrow, and a bit unrealistic. But that's sort of what we're moving towards. Also, in the practicalities of these things, whilst the agenda moves forward on these things, catch-up in the industry can be slow. And as of last year, I think some of the new requirements for engines for domestic passenger vessels in this category, there weren't any manufacturers actually manufacturing them to that standard. But there we are. Coal-fired ships also, we need to make the case for them. There are not that many of them, and in that sense they don't pollute too much, but I can see that there will be people against that. I was standing on the quay at Dartmouth one day last summer, and people make often very favourable remarks about Kingsway Castle as she steams off. And on this day, she just happened to puff out a bit of smoke. And there was a family next to me, and one little girl said, "Oh, look at all that smoke, Daddy. That's not very good for the environment, is it?" So, you know, the young are very green. Dear little sweet little Greta gets up and says A, B, and C, and she gets airtime for it. And stories go wild on social media. And the next. Disability is also something we need to think about, because this is something, again, that the government is keen on. And we need to remember that disability takes many forms, and the blind can't see signs, the deaf can't hear announcements. But I think in this whole arena, the most important thing, as with all things in life, is to be honest in what you can deliver, and don't promise what you can't deliver. For example, for wheelchairs, do you have level access? And if you don't have level access, then wheelchairs may not be possible to get aboard. And it is now very much the thing that you should not put your staff at risk. I mean, for example, P&O on their liners from cruise ships now, the crew refuse to handle wheelchairs and are instructed to refuse to handle wheelchairs. And if you book for a wheelchair, you have to bring with you somebody who will be your carer and look after your wheelchair. So I think in the disability arena, the important thing to remember is that if you can't handle certain disabilities safely, you need to be upfront about that and tell people in advance. And the next. And coming down the track fast is inclusivity. The government is very keen on this. The government is very keen on educating us about this. So I think we all need to look at ways we might encourage inclusivity. And we need to remember that if we want grants in future, many grants will depend on this. I know this is also a feature coming up more in the HLF. And the next. Well, I'm almost finished. Just a little slide about customer service, which I think is important to say. As we all know, customer service isn't about plastic smiles and reciting scripts. It's about delivering what you promise in a pleasant and polite fashion. Don't overstate what you can deliver. And remember that the best marketing is honest marketing. People think of marketing as being gilding the lily, but I think on the whole, the best marketing just says it as it is. And however good your marketing people are, people will buy what they want to buy. And if they don't like it, they won't buy it. And the best marketing tool is the product itself. And next. So let's now just come back on to COVID and the roadmap. As we said earlier, by the 21st of June and no earlier, all restrictions are lifted. On that subject to review. But in my view, you know, the social distancing, hand sanitizers, face masks, maybe plastic screens, we're going to have to live with these for some while after that. And the next. So what do we do now in these difficult and desperate times? And I think really everyone needs to ask ourselves, you know, are our markets there for us? Can we make ourselves cost effective in order to reduce our costs? Are we dependent on high and elusive footfalls which may not appear? And how can we take advantage of a boom summer? And the next. And I think we all need to ask ourselves, is it better to run in the hope of success? Is it better to run and go bust? Or is it better to hunker down and not run in 2021? And I think it's for each of us as operators to look at the relative risks in relation to our particular business model. I mean, if you are operating in a honeypot area on a low cost basis, That's one thing. If you're not in a honeypot area and you've got high costs and your potential passengers may be chimeral, then maybe that's a different thing. I think that lean ventures have the higher chance of success, and that may make all the difference between survival and failure in these tricky times. And the next. All in all, we have to find ways to adapt and change to survive. This is passenger access in 1937. The sharp-eyed amongst you will see that the gangway is at a rather steep angle, and that rather nice platform, although there's people standing on it, doesn't appear to have any barriers around, or no one's attached by grab lines and such like. But you know, that's how it was done then, and nobody batted an eyelid, really. Just get the people ashore faster and everyone was happy. But you know, we have to adapt and change to survive. And the next. And this is social distancing in the 1920s. This is the Totnes Castle running on the River Dart with probably about 400 people on. I mean, I think nationwide and throughout Europe, there has been a move to reduce passenger numbers in order to make for a better, comfortable experience. But I think COVID has exacerbated that, and you know, there's no way anyone would get away with attracting passengers onto a boat that crowded them in like that. And next. And finally, I think just to be optimistic, we need to remember that we're not alone. As I said at the outset, you know, there's 50 paddle steamers in Europe. There are 1,000 domestic passenger vessels in the UK. Most, I think, will survive this somehow, but some may not. And we all need to try to make sure that we're in the ones that will survive. So I would say, you know, make yourself lean, make yourself profitable, and just try and find your way to survive. And good luck in doing it. And that's me finished.
John, thank you very much indeed. That was really, really thought-provoking and very much what we'd hoped for. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave your last slide up for a moment or two while I just identify our next contributors before we open up for discussion. So bear with me, please. And Graham and Hannah, hopefully you will be able to.
Evening, Henry.
Good evening, Hannah. Well done, well done. Graham, are you okay now?
Yes, good evening, Henry. Good evening, Hannah, and everybody else.
In that case, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to leave John's presentation now. And hopefully we can go over to a suitable slide for you. Right, sorry, we seem to have a bit of a trouble here. Can I leave that up just for the moment and rather than...
Yeah, that's fine, Henry.
Can you see that? Yeah, okay. Hannah, would you like to introduce, please?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Good evening, everybody. And first of all, thanks very much, Henry, and the Maritime Heritage Trust for allowing myself and Graham from Shield Hall to share the platform tonight. And of course, thanks to John for his talk and his clever approach on handling a return to operations this season. For those of you I haven't already met, my name's Hannah Cunliffe. I'm the Director of National Historic Ships UK, and we're the government-funded advisory body set up to represent the interests of historic vessels across the UK. We maintain the National Register of Historic Vessels, which lists approximately 1,700 craft. And of course, it includes a number of operational passenger carrying ships from the UK, which range in size from 40-foot launches on Lake Windermere to the 268-foot long steamship Shieldhall, and of course Kingswear Castle, which John has been talking about this evening. Now, these vessels do have very specific needs and challenges, and custodians have to meet the modern day safety regulations and access requirements that John's mentioned in regard to the MCA. But of course, they have to do this whilst also retaining their integral significance, and as well as managing the funding associated with ongoing maintenance. And last year, as John said, COVID-19 really obliterated the operational season for these craft, taking out the majority of their revenue. And although some of them, like the Kingswear Castle, did manage to get back into operation for a short period of time with reduced capacity, many did not. And they had no option but to use what small reserves they'd built up, leaving little or nothing for essential maintenance this year, and thereby putting this valuable section of our heritage at risk. So if they're to survive, historic passenger craft need a strong comeback this year, and they need to make the most of the operational months during the summer and the chances to maximise income generation. Now, John had some great tips for reducing costs, but of course, it's easier said than done putting these into practice, with social distance still very much in evidence, and the difficulty of not being able to secure advanced bookings. Plus a real need to rebuild customer confidence and create a COVID-safe environment for everyone. And just before lockdown started last year, I was approached by the steamship Shieldhall at National Historic Ships, who were proposing a networking event and a discussion forum aimed at passenger carrying historic vessels, giving them the space to discuss their particular requirements and share knowledge. And now more than ever, we feel that this is really needed. And so we're delighted to be co-hosting a follow-up online event to today's session. So as Henry's now successfully got the slide up on the screen, you'll see that this is going to be held at 7 o'clock on the 12th of April. And it's aimed particularly at the custodians of these passenger carrying craft. We're going to have a panel of speakers from across the mobile heritage sector, and they'll be discussing the finer details of returning to operation in the present environment. So if this is something that interests you and you'd like to join us and take the discussion further, we'll ask that you in the first instance, please contact us at info@nationalhistoricships.org.uk to reserve your place. And it will be a free event, as is tonight. So I'm now going to pass over to Graham Mackenzie from the steamship Shieldhall, who's going to briefly